that you are there. Help us to know how we are called to be the beloved community, how we are called to be in fellowship, in deep friendship with one another, loving each other as a family in such a way that we inspire those around us to want to be a part of our family. Do this, Lord, in spite of me or through me. For this we pray. Amen. We are now in our third week of our Lenten series looking at the disciplines. For a quick recap, you okay? Are you okay? I thought you tripped. For a quick recap, the first week we looked at prayer. Last week we looked at meditation and gratitude and how these help us enrich our lives and our relationship with God. This week we turn our attention to fellowship, which in some ways is another way of saying friendship, but it's more than just a friendship. It's almost like being a family. And the thing about fellowship that makes it a spiritual discipline is that sometimes we have to work it. That sometimes if we are truly honest with ourselves, we realize that love is actually more than just an emotion. Love is an action, and sometimes it takes effort on our part to live in and practice that action. Even with our closest friends, even with our closest loved ones, there are times in our lives where we probably didn't quite feel in love with them or like loving them. And yet, we are still called to live into that practice. That is what makes us different as the children of God than the other people in the world. That when it becomes tough to love, we still choose to love. The early church was a great example of fellowship and love. They were very closely knit together. The early church would eat meals together. They would share all things and hold all things in common. Meaning that if anyone owned anything and another brother or sister in the congregation needed that thing, they would freely lend it and allow them to use it. It was these early Christians who practiced this love that even when it was difficult, that began to care for one another's illnesses, to care for people who they weren't even directly related to. Prior to Christianity, most people in the world, when somebody got sick, would take care of the sick person only if that person was a part of their actual family. Children would take care of parents, children, siblings, each other, but the idea of caring for a stranger who was suffering was not common practice. And yet the Christians began to love each other, so much so that they built and made the first hospitals. And Christians began to love each other so much and care for each other and each other's well-being that they began to make the first schools that were open to the public, where they taught people to read and write who were not a part of the upper classes. Christians who were so knit in community with one another that when others saw them at their meals and at their practice, when others saw them living lives together, both at work and in play, in worship, and other times, that they wanted to be a part of that movement. They wanted to be a part of that community. They wanted to feel that sense of belonging, that sense of love. Jesus had said that if you love one another, the world will know me through your love. And the early church was amazing at practicing that kind of love. Now, modern America, church has kind of fallen away from that, and we can see that in the trends of the church. We see how people nowadays are more willing to church hop, to find the things that they like, and when somebody upsets them at a church, or when there's conflict, or when there's something that they don't like, they are more than willing to just pick up, take their toys, go home, and move on to the next church. That churches here and now have lost that sense of community, that sense of permanent belonging, of like a family. And we don't spend the kind of time together, fellowshipping over meals and celebrating together and mourning together, that the early church felt. We don't have that same level of love and that same level of connection. We aren't at that same level of inspiration that we feel so much love flowing through ourselves and through each other that we decide that there's too much love to just contain in one place, and then we start finding others just to love because we need other people to love because we have that much love among ourselves. We have lost that. And the result is that we are no longer attracting new people to be a part of our congregations and our fellowship. We no longer are offering that love that fills the hole and the desire in our hearts and souls to the world beyond. And I don't know if it's because it's gotten difficult, or if we have gotten, lax because of the ease at which our ancestors were able to do these things, or the apparent ease. But I can tell you that even as churches now are filled with conflict, it is not that much different than the early church. Just look at the letters of Paul, and you can see how much conflict, how much struggle and controversy there were in those early churches. People who were essentially identifying and fighting over what the essentials were basic to the faith. And yet, even amidst all of these struggles and these turmoil, they still found that way to stay together. Still found that way to love each other. And to not allow their different thoughts and ideologies to separate them and split them apart. To divide them and cause them to leave. As Christians, Jesus is calling us to love one another. And we may need to begin to learn how to practice fellowship again. It may be time this Lent to add that into our lives, ways of inviting each other here in this room, in this moment, to more intimately enter our lives, to be there with us during the celebrations, to be there with us in those times of need. Perhaps this Lent we can open up ourselves more to the family that we have here and love on each other a little bit better and allow others to love on us a little bit deeper. And again, it's not easy. It's a practice. It's a discipline. And it's not always going to be roses and chocolates. Sometimes it's going to be struggle. And we're going to have to remember why it is that we're even in this relationship in the first place. But if we can make the time, and if we can invest ourselves in the lives of others here and allow them to invest in us, then I think we can build that beloved community that Jesus commanded us to do and to build and to be. And if we build that community, I think it will be a community that will attract other people. And by the time that we get to the celebration of Christ's great victory that is Easter, and into the days beyond, I think that we will be a people who can show the world Christ by our love for each other. May we learn to love and to fellowship once again. May we learn to practice this love and fellowship. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, it is not always easy to love us. We know that we are disobedient. We know that we do mean-spirited things, stupid things, selfish things. We know that we hurt one another. And yet you love us nonetheless. So much so that you were willing to give your life for us, even when most of us will not give our life for you. Lord, help us to know and learn your kind of love. Help us to live out your kind of love by loving and giving our lives not only for you, but for each other, so that the world may see our love for each other and know you through and by that love. Gracious Lord, help us to fellowship and to be a better community through the good times and the bad, finding strength in you to practice the discipline of fellowship. Amen.